Let's get right into it. Number 8. Pharmacos. A pharmacos was a human scapegoat, someone chosen to take on the sins of the entire community. During times of crisis, plague, famine, drought, cities would select someone to be the pharmacos. Usually, it was someone from the lowest social classes, an unpaid worker, a criminal, or someone with a physical deformity. They would feed and take care of this person for a while, almost treating them like royalty. But this wasn't kindness. They were basically fattening up a sacrifice. When the time came, they would dress the pharmacos in sacred garments and lead them through the city. People would throw stones at them and beat them with branches from a fig tree. This was supposed to transfer all the community's sins and bad luck onto the pharmacos. Finally, they would either throw the person off a cliff or burn them alive. Sometimes they would collect the ashes and scatter them into the sea. The whole thing was seen as a way to purify the city. Number 7. Kikon. This one's particularly interesting because it involves a religious ceremony gone wrong. Kikon was a special drink used in the Eleusinian Mysteries, which was one of the most important religious festivals in ancient Greece. The drink was made from barley, water, and various herbs. Sounds harmless, right? Well, here's where it gets interesting. Some historians think that sometimes the barley used in Kikon was contaminated with ergot, a fungus that contains compounds similar to LSD. In small doses, this might have caused the mystical experiences that people said they were experiencing during the ceremonies. But too much ergot can lead to a very unpleasant death. Ergot poisoning is nasty. First, you get painful muscle spasms. Then your hands and feet start feeling like they're on fire. You might hallucinate or have seizures. In severe cases, your limbs can develop gangrene and literally fall off. The really twisted part is that people experiencing these symptoms would think they were having a profound religious experience. They wouldn't realize they were actually dying from poison. And since the ceremonies were secret, we don't know how many people actually died this way. Number 6. Death by Hemlock. So you've managed to upset the wrong people in ancient Athens. Maybe you've been teaching the youth some controversial ideas, like our friend Socrates. Or maybe you've just been caught stealing olives from your neighbor's tree. Either way, you're now facing the famous hemlock execution. Here's how it goes down. You're given a cup of hemlock poison, which is basically ground-up hemlock plants mixed with water, and you have to drink it yourself. The effects start pretty quick. First, your feet and legs start feeling numb. The numbness slowly creeps up your body, kind of like when your foot falls asleep. Your legs get weaker and weaker until you can't stand anymore. Then your arms start going numb. The paralysis keeps moving up until it reaches your chest. At this point, you're having trouble breathing. Your heart starts slowing down. And here's the really messed up part. You're completely conscious through all of this. Your mind stays clear until the very end. You can literally feel yourself dying. The whole process takes about 30 minutes to an hour. And yes, this is exactly how Socrates went out. He apparently remained super chill about the whole thing, talking philosophy with his friends until he couldn't talk anymore. Number 5. Death by ostracism. Now this one's not a physical death, but in ancient Greece, it might as well have been. Here's how it worked. Once a year, the citizens of Athens would get together and vote on who they wanted to kick out of the city. They would write names on pieces of broken pottery called ostraca. If someone got more than 6,000 votes, they had to pack their bags and leave Athens for 10 years. Now you might be thinking, 10 years doesn't sound so bad. But remember, this isn't modern times where you can just FaceTime your family or work remotely. This is ancient Greece. Once you're out, you're out. You'd lose everything. Your home, your business, your social status. Your kids might grow up not knowing who you are. Your spouse might move on. And when you finally come back after 10 years, you're basically a stranger in your own city. This wasn't even a punishment for doing something wrong. You could get ostracized just for being too popular. The Athenians were so paranoid about anyone getting too powerful that they would sometimes ostracize their best leaders just to be safe. Number 4. Death in the mines of Laurion. If you thought your job was bad, wait until you hear about the silver mines of Laurion. These mines were basically Athens' piggy bank, producing the silver they used for their coins. But the human cost was absolutely horrifying. First off, you're working in tunnels that are barely big enough to crawl through. We're talking about spaces less than 3 feet high. Imagine spending 12 hours a day crawling around in what's basically a hot, dusty tube. The mines were full of lead dust and other nasty stuff that would slowly poison you. Your lungs would basically turn into rock over time. Most miners didn't last more than a few years before their bodies gave out. Then there's the constant threat of cave-ins. The ancient Greeks weren't exactly experts in mine safety. They would just dig until the tunnel looked like it would collapse on them, then move to a new spot. Sometimes the whole thing would collapse and bury the miners alive. And let's not forget about the heat. These mines could get up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. You're basically working in an oven, with no ventilation, and you're breathing in toxic dust. Most of the miners were slaves. They didn't even have a choice. They would work until they died, which usually didn't take very long. Historians estimate that the average life expectancy of a Laurian miner was less than 30 years. Number 3. Death by phalanx. The Greek phalanx was one of the most effective military formations in ancient warfare, but you didn't want to be a soldier on the battlefield facing a phalanx. Picture this. You're facing a wall of shields with 15-foot spears pointing at you. Behind those spears are more spears, and behind those are even more spears. It's basically a giant hedgehog of death coming at you. If you're in the front lines, you've got multiple problems. First, there's the psychological terror of watching this thing approach. Then there's the physical reality of trying to fight against it. The spears would hit you before you could even get close enough to use your own weapons. If you somehow survived that, you'd have to deal with the crushing weight of the entire formation pushing forward. People would literally get trampled to death under the phalanx. And what if you got wounded? Well, too bad. The formation would just keep moving forward, crushing anything in its path. There are accounts of battlefields after phalanx engagements describing bodies that were literally pressed into the ground. Number 2. Death by starvation in a siege. This might be the worst way to go in ancient Greece. City sieges could last for months or even years, and the people trapped inside would slowly starve to death. First, the food starts running out. The city would try to ration what they had, but eventually, people would start eating things they normally wouldn't. Pets, rats, leather from their shoes, anything that could be eaten. As things get worse, people start dying from malnutrition. Your body literally starts consuming itself. First, it burns through any fat reserves. Then it starts breaking down your muscles. Your organs begin to fail. But it's not just the lack of food. Sieges often led to disease outbreaks, with lots of people crammed together, limited clean water, and bodies that couldn't be properly buried. Diseases would spread like crazy. The defenders would sometimes throw dead bodies over the walls to try to spread diseases to the attacking army, but this would often backfire, as the decomposing bodies would contaminate their own water supply. One of the most famous examples was the siege of Potidaea by Athens in 430 BC. The inhabitants held out for 2 years before finally surrendering. By that point, some people had resorted to eating each other to survive. Number 1. Childbirth. If you were a woman in ancient Greece, this was probably your biggest fear. Childbirth was incredibly dangerous, with some estimates suggesting that up to 25% of women died during or shortly after giving birth. If there were complications during birth, there wasn't much they could do. No C-sections, no epidurals, not even basic antibiotics. If the baby was too large, both mother and child would likely die. Infection was another huge risk. They didn't understand germ theory, so hygiene wasn't exactly a priority. Many women who survived the actual birth would die days later from infection. The Greeks had a goddess specifically for childbirth. She was called Eileithyia. Women would pray to her and make offerings before giving birth. They would also keep special amulets nearby for protection. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.